So yesterday I saw a tweet from Conner Weigman talking about why people are forgotten. I felt like the Dre song should have come up when it comes to Conner Weigman, but Conner Weigman wrote about it, and I want to chit-chat with him. I know he had a good discussion with Billy last week, and here he is on the Brian Foley Law Hotline, Conner Weigman. What's up, man?
How we doing? It feels like whenever I talk about Conner Weigman, I get a couple of people that'll be like, hey, you just like him because of his first name. I point out that Conner Weigman's first name is spelled incorrectly, and if anything, it is a knock that he spells Connor with two N's and an E. So this is actually coming out of a place of frustration and not out of a place of bias.
Well, I know that about you. One of the things I love talking to you about, Conner, is the fact that sometimes we don't agree, yet you don't come with hot sports take Jake. You come with some reasons behind your opinions. And I guess let's start off with just, why did people forget about Conner Weigman? Is it because we've only seen him for a handful of games, and in those games he's been pretty darn good?
Hasn't been the starter for the majority of a season. And I think that he was trending in a very favorable direction. I think there are some that might look at some of his struggles that he had in the first half of that Auburn game before he got hurt, or they might look at the final score against Miami and say like, you know what, this was just another guy who wasn't going to work out. I saw some great signs from Conner Weigman early on last year. And if you want to go back to the Miami game, and if you want to pick him apart for those two picks, which, by the way, those are the only two picks he's thrown as a starter so far, you could point to an Anaya Smith drop, and you could point to him trying to make something happen on fourth down at a two-score game late that they were only in because he was actually playing really well and was unbelievable against pressure. I think Conner Weigman has shown you some good signs too, and the PFF numbers about how at that point of the season before he went down, he had the most touchdown passes in the country against the blitz. He has shown poise that I think you would hope to see out of a guy that was a five-star quarterback at the time. Obviously Jimbo's highest rated quarterback signee since Jameis Winston, and I'm a believer that he's going to take that next step. Now, he's not going to be talked about among the top tier SEC quarterbacks, and understandably so, because there are 5 quarterbacks in the SEC who are coming back after they just led their team to a New Year's Six bowl berth. That is really impressive. And there's depth at the position. He's not in the position like a Jackson Arnold at Oklahoma or a Nico Iamaleava at Tennessee, where they're these 5-star guys who are getting to start in year 2, much like Weigman was last year. So he's kind of the forgotten guy in this mix that I think we're going to be talking about a lot more once the season actually starts.
Conner, people also forget the offensive line has been atrocious for a couple years. There's a change of the offensive line coach, and let's face it, the Jimbo era, the last few years, held people back.
It did. And look, I don't want to be the person that says just because you have something new, it's automatically better. But I was really interested to see what Mike Elko was going to do with his offense. That's always a fascinating topic of discussion with a defensive-minded head coach, is how do you evaluate your coordinator? What are you looking for? Are you getting up there and talking about complementary football? Are you talking about the things that actually matter in a modern offense? And Mike Elko, in my opinion, crushed the hire of his OC by getting Collin Klein from Kansas State. And I know it's something that we've talked about before already, but I think the ability to recognize the type of offense that he ran with the tempo and the things that they were able to do with Will Howard, I thought went underappreciated nationally. The fact that Kansas State ends up with the top 10 offense in all of college football, despite the fact that coming into last season, it was like, well, they've lost Deuce Vaughn. Even though this team won the Big 12 championship, we expect them to maybe take a step back. And I thought they did some things really, really well on the offensive side of the ball, even with a lot of turnover at the receiver position. And that's kind of what A&M has this year. And it's kind of like, okay, this guy that's got a few of those starts that you think can take the next step, a guy that is going to be using a lot of new receivers that are coming in. I like the moves that they've made in the portal to be able to address those needs at the group of 5 level. And you feel like, okay, you should have an offense that can do some things in year 1. Obviously, you got to protect him. If you don't protect Conner Weigman, you're just going to be waiting on another injury. I don't care how good his pocket presence is. It would seem like a matter of time. But I do think that they have set themselves up for year 1 success, assuming, of course, they can find ways to just be at least average on the offensive line after they really have not been that post-2020.
So we actually did a segment if these 7 players lived up to their potential earlier today. What does that mean? I'm going to kind of rephrase it for you. if Conner Weigman plays the way he did, just at that level before he got hurt, okay, the 16-2. If the offensive line is just average, what does that mean for next year for this A&M team with that schedule and with what they have coming back? Just those two areas.
I think it means that they can be like an 8-win team. And I think that would be a great place to start in year one. The schedule is still really difficult. As Billy's pointed out, though, it's kind of good that the most difficult games on that schedule are going to be at Kyle Field. And that is still a benefit for a team in year one. And we know, obviously, what Mike Elko did year one at Duke, where they had historic success. And you're looking up going, wow, how did he turn that around so quickly? I think it's a little bit tougher to do that in the SEC. And even though we've seen coaches have great year ones in the SEC, and obviously we saw Kevin Sumlin have a great year one in College Station, I think there's still going to be a question about what do they look like week to week on the defensive side of the ball. Even though you like the pieces that they have, especially up front on that defensive line, that should be the strength of that group. You're still kind of wondering, all right, what's it going to look like in the secondary? Could they have moments where it just doesn't really come together and it just feels like they have to win a shootout? That to me lowers their ceiling a little bit, and it's more of like an 8-win regular season type ceiling for me. But who knows, man? I mean, you see Bill Connolly's percentage of returning production rankings that come out. It's my favorite offseason metric. A&M is number one in the SEC in that, at 18th in the country, which I think surprised a lot of people who felt like the big splashy losses of an Evan Stewart, of a Walter Nolan, were kind of going to tell the story of this 2024 team. And I don't necessarily know that that's going to be the case.
Where my optimism comes in, and look, I don't know, I've been wrong the last couple of years, but where my optimism comes in is they have revamped that secondary. Okay, so there's that. It'll be better. You won't throw on them as much as Miami did and every other team did, and they should have beat Bama, in my opinion. They could have beat Tennessee. There's these games that they should have, had they been able to stop the pass. That'll be better. You also have a better head coach philosophy, more organized. Just that alone, I feel like this team should be better than they've been the last couple of years. And I'm talking, I think they should be a 9-win team. But until I see it, until I see the offensive line do it, until I see the secondary step up the way I think they can, it's still a TBD.
And one of the things, too, I think schematically they're going to be in a better place on both sides of the ball. Now, I was a believer in what Bobby Petrino did in his variation of that offense and the fact that they improved by 11 points per game. But I think schematically on both sides of the ball, they should feel like they're starting off in a better place. And one of the things that, Billy brought up that just didn't really work for that team last year with the strength and where they should have been at their best. It's like, why are they running a 3-man front? Why are they running a 3-man front with a defensive line that is just loaded with talent? This should be the strength of your team. And instead, it felt like too many times, like they're running a 3-man front and they've got, all these freshman DBs, and it just did not necessarily work. And they would get these guys that would be put on islands, and it wasn't particularly good to watch. And so I think that Elko gives you a better chance of feeling like guys will be in the right spot. And not like there are these blow-up games like what we saw against Alabama, like what we saw against Miami, and even Ole Miss too, where there are just clear weaknesses that are being exploited left and right. I don't think that quite happens to that extent, and I feel like that makes it a little bit more palatable in year one of the Elko era. Here's
another thing, philosophy-wise, that would drive us crazy on this show, and we got to see what Coach Elko wants to do, but because you had so many 5- and 4-star guys, the rotation, like a defensive line group would be out there for one series, and if they were balling, they wouldn't come back typically for the next series. And I understand we're in a different world of college football where you have to but sometimes you got to go with the hot hand. If A-Chain is going, you got to go to A-Chain. You know what I'm saying? And I feel like we didn't see a lot of that.
Elko did a really good job of that when he was the defensive coordinator for Jimbo Fisher too. I mean, that's one of those things I look back on. And look at that 2021 unit that finished third in the country in scoring, and go look back at some of the snap counts of those guys up front. They wouldn't leave the field. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was incredible. And yeah, maybe that hurt some of the PFF grades and stuff like that. But at the same time, it just felt like they had those guys up front that they could really trust, and they had an identity that they could truly build around. And part of that is, it's conditioning too. And it's being able to say, hey, we want you to play on the defensive line, and we want you to play 50 snaps in a given game. We might feel like we have to rotate guys at times, and there are certain ways to do that. I think Georgia is a great example of a program that has kind of mastered that. They have depth for days, and they can get away with that. But I think that A&M getting back to that and trying to establish an identity is going to be a really important part of what Mike Elko tries to do to be able to establish more defensive consistency.
Conner, what was your favorite part of the Bill O'Brien Ohio State era?
That's a good question, man. There were a lot of great memories. My personal favorite was this Twitter X discourse between the people that watched Bill O'Brien at Alabama and watched what the 2022 Bama offense was, and then those who simply looked at his resume, looked at his scoring offenses, and thought that that told the entire story. There was a very clear divide. And if you watched him at Bama, you laughed at the fact that he was hired at Ohio State. And if you didn't watch him at Bama, you thought Ohio State just got a home run hire. It is weird for me to process that there was a time, a very brief time, it looked like, at least, he's reportedly going to be the head coach at Boston College. I don't think that anything is finalized just yet on that front. But assuming that he is the coach at Boston College, Ohio State will have dodged a bullet. There's no doubt about it. Like I saw what that 2022 group looked like, albeit one that had some questions at receiver. But I think Ohio State, with all the firepower that they should have on the offensive side of the ball, to me, I would go back to Ryan Day calling plays, but maybe I'm in the minority and I haven't lived through it as much as those fans in Columbus have.
Hey, last thing for you. Missouri made some big news yesterday. NIL, big deal. Not just NIL, the renovations to the stadium. That is, I guess, the beauty of what winning can do for a program.
62 mil is not nothing. It's not. It's pretty significant. I know not all of that is just going to go directly into the pockets of the football program, and being able to use that in the way that, that's just an NIL pool. Like it's not going to be just as simple as that. But you're right. It is what winning does. And one season, we can forget about these seasons. We can. We've already forgotten that TCU went to a national championship 13 months ago. We have already blocked that out of our mind. Well, in part because the 65-7 happened and they didn't really show up for the national championship. But regardless, it's all about sustainability. And I credit Mizzou for actually looking at ways to be able to sustain this. And they have had success in the NIL space, especially in their state, because of those state laws that allow high school players to be able to benefit off NIL as soon as they sign with an in-state school. And that has really helped them and Eli Drinkowitz with recruiting. But I think Mizzou has a little bit more sustainability. We kind of talked about that when Mizzou and A&M came into the SEC, and they have this bad year one in the SEC, and then year two, year three, they're getting to the SEC championship. It kind of took people by surprise. But this year, and what they're trying to do to live up to last year's expectation of an 11-win season is different. I do think there's a little bit more sustainability, and the schedule sets up really well for them to show that 2023 wasn't exactly a fluke.
Conner O'Gara, Saturday Down South, man. Appreciate your time, buddy. Talk to you soon.
Absolutely. Appreciate it, man.